December 1939, 7:15 a.m. Kola Sector, Eastern Finland. Temperature -38 degrees Celsius. Simo Häyhä lay motionless in a shallow depression, invisible beneath fresh snow. Only his eyes moved, scanning the tree line 200 meters ahead where Soviet infantry were preparing another assault. His breath condensed in the brutal cold, but he'd learned to hold it when aiming, or to fill his mouth with snow so vapor wouldn't give away his position. The rifle in his hands was a Finnish M28-30, a modified Mosin Nagant with no telescopic sight. Just iron sights. Simple, reliable, nearly impossible to see when properly concealed. He'd been in position for 3 hours without moving. The Soviets were about to learn why the Finns called this sector the Valley of Death. Häyhä wore white winter coveralls over his uniform, white cloth wrapped around his rifle. Against the snow-covered forest, he was effectively invisible. The Soviets advancing toward Finnish lines wore olive-drab greatcoats, dark shapes against white terrain. They moved in groups, talking, smoking, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They had no idea a single Finnish rifleman was watching them through iron sights, calculating range, wind, and the precise moment to fire. When the first Soviet soldier dropped face first into the snow with a single round through the chest, his comrades didn't immediately understand what had happened. The crack of the rifle report echoed through frozen pines, impossible to pinpoint. By the time they started looking for the shooter, Häyhä had already cycled his bolt and was sighting on his second target. Another crack. Another man down. Then silence. The snow swallowed sound and concealed movement. The Soviets began firing wildly into the forest, hundreds of rounds churning up snow and splintering trees. But Häyhä wasn't where they were shooting. He'd shifted position, moving 15 meters to the left while staying low, using terrain features and snow to remain invisible. He would kill 7 more men before noon. This was the Winter War, a conflict that should have been a Soviet walkover but became a frozen nightmare. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with overwhelming force. Over 450,000 troops, thousands of tanks and aircraft, backed by Stalin's industrial might. Finland fielded roughly 300,000 soldiers, outdated equipment, and almost no armor or air support. The international community expected Finland to collapse within weeks. But the Finns knew their forests, their weather, and how to fight in conditions that would kill a man almost as quickly as a bullet. They understood that in the deep winter cold of the Karelian wilderness, numbers meant less than adaptation, mobility, and marksmanship. Soviet forces poured across the border expecting rapid conquest. Instead, they encountered small Finnish units using the terrain like a weapon. Ambushes from white-clad ski troops who appeared from nowhere, struck hard and vanished before Soviet reinforcements could respond. Artillery batteries destroyed and abandoned in the snow. Entire battalions cut off and frozen to death in temperatures that reached -40. And snipers. Hundreds of Finnish snipers who turned Soviet advances into killing grounds. Among those snipers was a 34-year-old farmer from the municipality of Rautjärvi. Simo Häyhä stood just over 5 feet tall, quiet, unassuming, a man who'd spent his life hunting in these forests. Before the war, he'd been a competitive marksman, winning local and regional shooting competitions with scores that bordered on the uncanny. When mobilization orders came, he reported to his unit, JR 34, the 34th Infantry Regiment, and was immediately recognized as an exceptional shot. His commanders placed him at Kola, a strategic sector where Soviet forces were attempting to break through Finnish lines and cut the country in half. The Soviets attacked in waves, sometimes thousands of men at a time, trying to overwhelm Finnish positions through sheer mass. Häyhä's job was simple: make them pay for every meter, kill as many as possible, break their morale, make them afraid to advance. He was exceptionally good at this job. The Finnish M28-30 rifle Häyhä carried was a domestically modified Mosin Nagant, built by Seiko to tighter tolerances than standard Soviet weapons. The action was smooth, the trigger crisp, the barrel accurate to ranges far beyond what Häyhä actually needed. Most engagements happened at under 400 meters, often closer to 150 or 200 meters, where iron sights were perfectly adequate for a marksman of Häyhä's caliber. He deliberately chose not to use a telescopic sight. The reasoning was tactical and practical. A scope required the shooter to raise his head higher too. Acquire the sight picture, creating a larger profile. In deep snow and low light, that extra few centimeters of elevation could mean the difference between invisible and exposed. A scope's glass lens could fog in extreme cold, or catch a glint of sunlight that gave away position. A scope added weight and complexity, more things to break or malfunction when equipment was pushed to its limits. Häyhä's approach was the opposite. Minimize profile, maximize simplicity, trust his fundamentals, get close enough that iron sights were all he needed. The results spoke for themselves. His hunting techniques adapted perfectly to combat. Before the war, Häyhä had stalked game through these same forests, learning how animals moved, where they paused, how to predict behavior and position himself along their routes. Soviet infantry, exhausted and cold and unfamiliar with the terrain, followed predictable patterns. They moved along obvious paths. They clustered for warmth. They paused in exposed positions to smoke or talk. Häyhä would identify likely approach routes, prepare multiple firing positions with clear lines of sight and concealed exits, then wait, sometimes for hours. His patience was absolute. Cold didn't bother him. He'd grown up in these conditions. Hunger and thirst were manageable. What mattered was remaining unseen until the moment he chose to fire. He used the snow to his advantage in ways that bewildered Soviet troops. He'd build up low berms of packed snow to create rests and concealment. He'd position himself in shallow depressions or behind fallen logs, letting snow drift over him until only his eyes and rifle muzzle were exposed. After firing several rounds, he'd withdraw and relocate, never shooting from the same position long enough for enemy artillery or counter-snipers to fix his location. One of his signature techniques involved breath control in sub-zero temperatures. Human breath condenses into visible vapor in extreme cold, a giveaway that pinpoints a sniper's position. Häyhä would fill his mouth with snow before exhaling, capturing the moisture before it could betray him. It was a small detail, but in a war where survival often depended on small details, it kept him alive. He also poured water onto the snow in front of his firing position and let it freeze, creating an ice layer that prevented muzzle blast from kicking up powder snow, another tell that could reveal his location. These weren't techniques taught in any manual. They were the innovations of a man who understood his environment completely and adapted to it with ruthless efficiency. By late December, Häyhä had become something the Soviets feared more than artillery or machine guns: a ghost. Reports from captured Soviet officers and interrogated prisoners indicated growing terror among frontline troops about Finnish snipers, particularly one operating in the Kola sector who seemed to kill with supernatural accuracy. Soviet commanders began calling him Belaya Smrt, the White Death. They offered rewards for his capture or killing. They deployed counter-sniper teams specifically to hunt him. They increased artillery barrages on suspected sniper positions. None of it worked. Häyhä would disappear into the forest, re-emerge somewhere else, and continue killing. Finnish commanders tracked his confirmed kills through after-action reports and unit tallies. By early January 1940, the count had reached over 100. By late January, over 200. Soviet attacks in his sector became noticeably less aggressive. Troops would advance hesitantly, breaking formation to stay apart so one bullet couldn't hit multiple men, refusing to move through open areas where snipers might be watching. Morale was collapsing. The psychological impact of knowing that any moment, from any direction, a bullet could end you, and you'd never see the shooter, was devastating. This was Häyhä's true weapon. Not just the rifle, but the fear it created. Every kill reduced Soviet offensive capability not just by one soldier, but by the cumulative effect on the morale of everyone who witnessed it or heard about it. The Kola front was a nightmare landscape that winter. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius and stayed there for weeks. Vehicles wouldn't start. Weapons froze. Men lost fingers and toes to frostbite in minutes without proper protection. The Soviets, expecting a quick campaign, had inadequate winter gear. Many units were still wearing standard-issue greatcoats and leather boots, completely insufficient for these conditions. Finns wore layered wool, fur-lined boots, and white camouflage designed for exactly this environment. Soviet soldiers huddled around fires, desperate for warmth, fires that marked their positions for Finnish artillery and snipers. They advanced in tight formations for mutual support and warmth, formations that made them easier targets. They used roads and cleared areas because moving through deep snow in the forest was exhausting, predictable movement that Finnish defenders exploited ruthlessly. Everything about the environment favored the Finns, and Häyhä exploited every advantage. His daily routine was methodical. Wake before dawn. Eat a cold meal, usually bread, cheese, maybe some dried meat, nothing that required a fire or produced smoke. Check his rifle, verify the action was clean and functioning. Wrap himself in white camouflage. Move to predetermined positions, varying his route each day to avoid patterns. Settle in and wait. Sometimes he'd kill 5 or 6 Soviets in a morning. Sometimes none. If conditions weren't right or if enemy movement was too cautious, he wouldn't risk revealing his position unnecessarily. He'd return to Finnish lines after dark, report kills to his company commander, clean his rifle, and prepare for the next day. No drama, no bravado. It was work. Deadly, necessary work that he performed with the same precision he'd once used to hunt elk. What they didn't know, what none of the Soviet commanders directing waves of infantry into Häyhä's sector could have imagined, was that this quiet farmer was operating at a level of marksmanship efficiency that would make him the deadliest individual combatant of the entire Second World War era. Finnish records from JR-34 document Häyhä's progress through the winter. By mid-January, his confirmed kills exceeded 200. By early February, over 300. These numbers weren't propaganda exaggerations. They were logged by unit commanders who tracked sniper effectiveness for operational planning. Each kill was noted, often with location and approximate time, so that patterns could be analyzed and tactics refined. Other Finnish snipers were effective. Many recorded dozens or even over 100 kills during the Winter War. But Häyhä's totals were in a different category entirely. He was killing at a rate of roughly 5 to 7 Soviet soldiers per day, every day for weeks on end. The consistency was as remarkable as the total. Understanding these numbers requires context. Modern military snipers, operating with far superior optics, range-finding equipment, and support, typically measure successful careers in dozens of confirmed kills across multiple deployments. A sniper with 50 confirmed kills is considered exceptionally effective. 100 is rare. Häyhä reached 5 times that figure in less than 100 days, using iron sights in the worst weather conditions imaginable. The achievement seems almost impossible until you understand how he fought. He wasn't engaging at 800 or 1,000 meters like modern precision marksmen. He was operating at 150 to 400 meters, ranges where his rifle was absolutely effective and where his fieldcraft made him nearly impossible to detect. He chose engagements carefully, taking only shots he knew he could make, never wasting ammunition or revealing position for low-probability targets. His hit rate approached 100% because he simply didn't miss. Soviet forces tried everything to stop him. Counter-sniper teams equipped with scoped Mosin Nagants and SVT-40 rifles were sent specifically to hunt Finnish snipers. They achieved some success against less experienced or less cautious shooters, but Häyhä remained elusive. His discipline was absolute. He never fired from the same position twice in succession, never followed predictable patterns, never stayed exposed longer than necessary. Soviet artillery began systematic bombardment of any tree line or terrain feature that might conceal a sniper. Entire sections of forest were shelled into splinters. Häyhä would withdraw during bombardments, wait for them to end, then return to slightly different positions and resume killing. The Soviets tried infiltration tactics, sending small teams to probe Finnish lines and locate sniper positions. Häyhä would spot these teams first, eliminate the lead scouts, and the survivors would retreat having learned nothing except that approaching Finnish positions was suicide. If you're still here, thank you. Please consider subscribing so more people can discover these stories from history. By late February 1940, Häyhä's confirmed kill count approached 500. The exact number is debated. Finnish military records and Häyhä's own post-war accounts support figures around 505 sniper kills, plus an estimated 200 or more with a Suomi KP/31 submachine gun during close-range defensive actions when Soviet troops broke through to Finnish positions. However, historians caution that verifying individual kill counts in the chaos of war is nearly impossible, especially when records were maintained under combat conditions and sometimes relied on estimates. Conservative academic assessments place his confirmed sniper kills at several hundred or over 200, acknowledging that the higher figures may include kills that couldn't be definitively attributed to him alone versus other snipers operating in the same sector. What's undisputed is that Häyhä was extraordinarily effective, that he killed more enemy soldiers than any other individual sniper documented in modern warfare, and that Soviet forces specifically identified and feared him. The Winter War was grinding toward conclusion by early March. Finland had held far longer than anyone expected. Stalin had anticipated conquering the country in weeks, but 3 months of brutal fighting had cost the Soviets hundreds of thousands of casualties, thousands of vehicles and aircraft, and international humiliation. Finnish resistance was heroic but unsustainable. Ammunition, supplies, and reinforcements were running out. Casualties were mounting. The Soviet Union could replace losses indefinitely. Finland could not. By late February, both sides knew the war would end soon. The question was what terms Finland could secure before complete exhaustion forced unconditional surrender. Soviet commanders intensified attacks along the Kola front, trying to break through before negotiations finalized. Häyhä continued his work. Ammunition was scarce, so he made every round count. His rifle was wearing. Thousands of shots fired over 3 months had eroded the barrel's rifling, gradually reducing accuracy. He compensated by getting closer to targets, further reducing engagement ranges to maintain his standard of precision. On March 6, 1940, he was in position in the early morning, engaging Soviet troops approximately 150 meters from Finnish lines. The weather was relatively warm for March in Karelia, only -10 degrees Celsius, with light snow falling. Visibility was good. Häyhä had killed 3 Soviet soldiers and was sighting on a 4th when an explosive round struck him in the lower left jaw. The projectile accounts vary between an explosive bullet, a high-explosive rifle round, or shrapnel from a close artillery burst, shattered his mandible, destroyed half his lower face, and threw him backward into the snow. Nearby Finnish soldiers heard the impact and his body hitting the ground, but initially thought he'd been killed outright. The injury was catastrophic. His jaw was gone, teeth were blown away, blood poured into the snow. He was unconscious but somehow still breathing. Finnish medics reached him within minutes, applied pressure bandages to stop the hemorrhaging, and evacuated him to the rear. The stretcher bearers later said they didn't expect him to survive the trip to the aid station. They'd seen men die from less severe facial wounds, not just from blood loss but from airways blocked by blood and tissue, causing them to drown in their own fluids. Häyhä survived the evacuation. Field surgeons stabilized him, though the prognosis was grim. Massive tissue loss, bone fragments throughout the wound, high risk of infection, probable permanent disfigurement. He remained unconscious for days. Finnish commanders, assuming he would die, prepared to announce his death and honor his service. Unit records note that on March 6, 1940, Häyhä's combat service ended due to severe wounds. He regained consciousness approximately 1 week later, on March 13th, the same day the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed, ending the Winter War. What happened next would change everything about how Finland viewed its survivors. The war ended with Finland ceding significant territory to the Soviet Union, roughly 10% of its land, including the entire Karelian Isthmus, but maintaining independence. Over 25,000 Finnish soldiers had been killed, nearly 44,000 wounded. Soviet casualties were estimated between 150,000 and 300,000 dead, with hundreds of thousands more wounded. The disparity reflected the effectiveness of Finnish tactics and the brutality of the environment. Häyhä woke into this aftermath, alive but maimed, his fighting career over at age 34. His recovery took months. Multiple surgeries reconstructed his jaw using bone grafts and metal supports. His face was permanently disfigured. The left side of his lower jaw and cheek remained sunken and scarred. He needed assistance eating and speaking clearly for the rest of his life. But he was alive, conscious, and eventually able to walk and function. The Finnish government promoted him to second lieutenant, a battlefield commission recognizing his service, and awarded him various decorations. He became a national hero, though he personally disliked attention and avoided publicity whenever possible. Post-war interviews describe him as quiet, modest, uncomfortable with fame, preferring to live simply on his farm. The broader impact of Häyhä's service, and that of hundreds of other Finnish snipers, was significant. The Winter War demonstrated that small, well-trained forces using superior fieldcraft could inflict disproportionate casualties on numerically superior enemies, especially in terrain and weather conditions that neutralized technological advantages. Häyhä's techniques influenced sniper doctrine worldwide. The emphasis on concealment over long-range shooting, the use of iron sights in certain conditions, the integration of hunters and outdoorsmen into sniper roles, these became standard considerations in military training. During World War II, both Soviet and German forces developed extensive sniper programs drawing lessons directly from the Winter War. The Eastern Front saw thousands of snipers on both sides, many trained using principles validated in Finnish combat. Soviet military analysis after the Winter War was scathing. Multiple reports blamed inadequate winter equipment, poor reconnaissance, incompetent officers purged by Stalin's paranoia, and underestimation of Finnish defensive capabilities. The sniper problem was noted repeatedly. Soviet infantry morale had been shattered by constant threat from invisible Finnish marksmen. Recommendations included better camouflage, improved winter warfare training, development of counter-sniper doctrine, and psychological preparation for fighting in conditions where individual soldiers were hunted rather than simply engaged by area weapons. Many of these lessons were applied when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, though Stalin's purges of competent military leadership meant that institutional knowledge was limited. The question of Häyhä's exact kill count remains debated. Finnish sources generally cite approximately 505 sniper kills, based on his own accounting and records from JR 34. Some Finnish historians include his estimated 200-plus kills with the Suomi submachine gun during defensive actions, bringing total combat kills to over 700. Post-war interviews with Häyhä himself suggest he believed the sniper total was around 500 or more, but acknowledged that precise counting was impossible under combat conditions. Soviet records, where they exist, are incomplete and often contradictory. Casualty reporting during the Winter War was chaotic, and losses to snipers were rarely distinguished from other infantry casualties. Modern historians generally accept that Häyhä killed several hundred Soviet soldiers with his rifle, that he was the most effective sniper of the Winter War, and that claims of 500-plus kills, while possibly accurate, cannot be independently verified to modern evidentiary standards. What matters is not the precise number, but what Häyhä represented: an ordinary man who became extraordinarily effective through skill, discipline, and intimate knowledge of his environment. He wasn't a superhero or a myth. He was a farmer who knew how to shoot, how to move through forests without being seen, how to endure cold that would incapacitate most men, and how to apply those skills with lethal precision. The nickname White Death was given by enemies who feared him, not invented by propagandists. The Soviets, who survived encounters with Finnish snipers, brought back stories that spread through their units. A ghost in white who killed from nowhere and vanished. That fear had tactical value beyond the actual casualties inflicted. Häyhä lived until 2002, dying peacefully at age 96. He never returned to combat. His injuries and the end of the Winter War meant his military career concluded in March 1940. He spent the remaining decades farming, hunting, and occasionally speaking about his experiences when asked. Interviews from his later years show a man who took no particular pride in killing, who viewed his service as necessary duty, and who preferred to remember fallen comrades rather than his own achievements. When asked how he became such an effective sniper, his answer was characteristically simple: practice. When asked if he regretted killing so many men, he replied that he regretted the necessity of war, but not his actions. Finland had been invaded, and he defended his country. It's the answer of a soldier who understood exactly what he'd done and why. The Winter War's legacy shaped Finland for generations. The country's survival against overwhelming odds became central to national identity, proof that determination, skill, and adaptation could overcome numerical inferiority. The war also left scars: lost territory, displaced populations, tens of thousands dead, and the knowledge that survival had come at enormous cost. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Finland joined the attack in what became known as the Continuation War, attempting to reclaim lost territories. Häyhä did not participate. His injuries precluded further combat service. That war ended in 1944 with Finland again ceding territory, but maintaining independence. The Cold War years saw Finland walking a difficult line between Soviet influence and Western alignment. But the country never became a Soviet satellite. The Winter War's example remained. Finland would fight if necessary, and that fight would be costly enough to deter aggression. Häyhä's story endures because it combines extraordinary individual achievement with broader historical significance. He represents the effectiveness of the Finnish defense during the Winter War, ordinary men doing extraordinary things under impossible conditions. His methods illustrate fundamental principles of irregular warfare. Use terrain to your advantage, Know the environment better than your enemy. Minimize your signature. Maximize efficiency. His survival, barely, from a wound that should have killed him shows both the randomness of combat and the resilience of human beings under extreme stress, and his post-war life, returning to farming, avoiding fame, living quietly until old age, reminds us that even the deadliest sniper in history was ultimately just a man who did his duty and went home. If you found this story worth your time, a like genuinely helps others discover it. Please subscribe and hit notifications. We're bringing these forgotten missions and the men who fought them back into the light. Real stories, real people, no Hollywood exaggeration. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. United States, UK, Canada, Australia, Finland, and if someone in your family served in these wars, we'd be honored to hear about it. These men and their actions deserve to be remembered accurately. Thank you for listening and for keeping their memory alive.